Sissel, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, taking your time, and we are very honored that Startup Guide could join us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. It's always a pleasure.
Brilliant. We start with, as we with all other fireside and lunch chats. If we rewind a little bit backward, you could start and talk to the audience about your background and how did you become interested in startups, entrepreneurship space, if you start there.
Sure. So, well, it started basically very, very early on when I was like 18, 19 years old. I actually wanted to become a musician when I was really young, but I was not really good enough to be it. I was not really a good singer. I could sing, but I was not a really good singer. I could play guitar, but I was not the best. So I started working a lot behind the scenes of musicians. So I was part of building a local stage for upcoming artists in my hometown in Denmark. And I think that process of building something up from scratch that was not existing yet was something that I was never taught in school, and I was never really good in school either. So suddenly I figured out that there is something here that I really, really liked. And while I was studying at high school, so when you study high school in Denmark when you're between 18 to 20, 21, I was working at a local cafe, and me and my friend that was working there, we could see that the service was not good enough, and we came up with an idea to basically create a Just Eat system in-house. So it was a very simple idea of scanning a QR code on your table, and you would then order and pay right away, and it would be sent to an SMS printer in the bar and in the kitchen. And the waiter's job was then to make sure that you would get the food and the drinks and everything would be a better customer service experience. And all the people we talked with at the cafe, they loved the idea, the customers, of course. So we quite early on started building a prototype. We got in some guys that was developers from Copenhagen. They were building something similar. So we merged forces, and in all that time we didn't speak to that many cafes, which was probably the biggest mistake. Because when the thing actually came out, it was so hard for the cafes to integrate. And in the end of the day, it was not necessarily that it was hard for them to do, because it was quite simple system, but it was more, would you be willing to take the risk? Because what if it doesn't work? So I think that was my first real startup lesson, number one, really understand your users, not only the end users, but also your potentially B2B users and stakeholders. And I'm telling this story because it was kind of the gateway into like the startup world, right? Like throughout this project, I got introduced to the world of entrepreneurship, in a sense, right? Building something that was not existing yet and making a lot of mistakes and being, to a certain extent, super naive, and understanding how beautiful it is to be naive, because it also just makes you jump out of things. So I was thinking to myself, how could I help young entrepreneurs that had this drive and, to a certain extent, the risk willingness that a lot of people are lacking the older they grow and the more responsibility they get? How can you basically try to keep this openness that you have when you're very young, and how can you give these people the right tools and the right network to succeed? Because I didn't necessarily see myself going the standard way of going to the university, potentially getting a good job, and then afterwards then building my company, right? Which is, to a certain extent, if we don't look at Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and all of these, that's how a lot of entrepreneurs actually look like. And they also are often men. So that's a different topic. So I actually went to Berlin when I stopped studying my high school. I went to Berlin, and I basically said, I don't know when I'm coming back, but I want to start this project, which should help our young entrepreneurs. I didn't know how it was going to look like, and with the mindset of going in there and just wanting to learn, I figured out when I came that, first of all, the startup world was booming there, right? Like in Denmark, we're talking around 2010, 11 in Denmark at that time, entrepreneurship was still something that was for the crazy people, that was making experiments and sitting in basements and stuff like that. And was not really, like something that was respected as it is today in a sense. And what was very interesting was that when I came to Berlin in 2012, this was right after the financial crisis. So there was this feeling of, how to say, urgency, and also kind of a bigger risk willingness in a sense, because a lot of these people had lost jobs. A lot of these people couldn't get jobs. So what do? Like, you build your own thing, or you're definitely easier for you to take a risk when you already are not in the safety zone. And with that as well, also, I think something else, when I look back, there was also a bigger distrust to the more regular institutions of, like, everyone said, like, oh, just get a job in the bank, right? But the bank just fucked us over. Sorry for my words. so the old institutions of, like, this is the safe job, this is the good jobs, started to change a bit. And then the third thing was, of course, this whole access to technology that have become so much easier for people to. So it was like, suddenly you could set up a web shop or an e-commerce shop like this, right? And sell your products on Amazon. And it was not only that, but like, it became more accessible. More people had actually access to it. And also the first people that have been educated in it were out and was wanting to start businesses. So all of these things together created, of course, that tech became a big thing, not only in Silicon Valley, where a lot of the first tech companies, biggest tech companies born, but then it started to soup out. And I think also just timing is everything, right? Like, I really believe that, you cannot have a good idea if the timing is not right. Timing is really everything. And at that time, Startup Guide was kind of born because we were at the right place at the right time as well. And of course, a lot of hard work. But what happened then was that I started to go into all these events and understanding how the startup ecosystems worked in Berlin. And as a foreigner, which I'm originally Danish, coming to Berlin, I started recognizing that I was not the only foreigner coming there, right? There was, like, exactly because of after the financial crisis, a lot of people started moving places, and Berlin have always been attracting a lot of foreigners because Berlin is very different. It's very diverse, very creative. You have the history of the wall. You have have a techno scene. It's a lot of very interesting combination of a lot of things. And suddenly this became a tech mecca. We suddenly saw SoundCloud and Wunderkind and a lot of like big tech companies coming out of a place where there actually were no money, right? Like, Berlin is like, actually a very poor city, and I remember the quote from the mayor in Berlin saying, Berlin is sexy, but Berlin is poor, but it's sexy, right? And it kind of, because of that, it attracted some of these companies and talent, and we started doing some research, and we actually figured out that in 2012, 42% of all the entrepreneurs or all the startups that was founded in Berlin were founded by at least one foreign co-founder. So you had a huge ecosystem which was highly international, and all the content and the access to information were mostly in German. And that was striking for me, and just figuring out your way coming as a foreigner as well. You had to do a lot of hard work and a lot of networking, a lot of digging to get to the right places. And you would also learn that people have actually made a lot of mistakes before that was not really accessible anywhere. So I think the combination of all these things, coming to Berlin with a mission of helping young entrepreneurs, I did various projects there, but then the one who really stood out was like this idea about creating some kind of lonely planet for entrepreneurs. That was also the one that, when I talked with people really liked it, and they all said, you should do a blog, you should put this online. And I was like, I tried before creating this Wi-Fi. It was called the the Just Eat in House project, where I'm not a developer, I'm not technical at all, and I actually liked the idea about that I could actually do this by myself, right? To a certain extent, I would need help, but to a certain extent, it was, you could put content in a book and produce it. It's way harder than it sounds, but the idea of creating something, a physical product, was very good for me. And then also I like the idea of also putting a lot of effort and attention to it. Like, and I think when you print something, when you put something on paper, it's not something that can just be changed again, which of course also have a lot of downsides. But what the good side is about, that people actually really respect that. And when I then actually started asking people around if they wanted to be part of this project, because of there was a book, they actually really liked it, even though most people didn't believe in the project though. They said, like, this is never going to fly, you know, everything is changing so fast, how are you going to scale this? And I actually really didn't have these things in mind. You know, I never intended this to be a project that was supposed to scale. It was a project that was made because I had a huge love for Berlin and for the startup ecosystem, and for generally helping the next generation of entrepreneurs and creating a product that I would have needed myself. So within a few months, we actually got the project up running. And instead of like a normal, like a Lonely Planet would work like this, you would put one author on it and go there for 2 or 3 months. And then that person would be that person's point of view that would reflect the book. But I couldn't really do that because I believe that there's so many different points of view that reflects the startup ecosystem in Berlin. So what we did was we asked people to give, basically to be part of either doing interview or writing pieces. So I would have some journalists on that would write the pieces, some will also write themselves, and then we were editing it. And so it became a sample of different articles and different point of view from the different stakeholders. So you would have the founders, of course, you will have the upcoming startups, you will have investors, you will have, you know, accelerator programs, you will have the co-working spaces, the programs from the university, all of these people that have an active play in the ecosystem, they would all give their point of view, and it would be very like how-to oriented, so both inspirational, but also how can you engage, how can you learn from that? Because one thing that I always found hard with like inspirational biographies of, you know, great thinkers or entrepreneurs is that it feels sometimes very far from you. And I wanted to create something that is very close to you. And I think that's also what Startup Grind, you know, I've been hugely inspired by Startup Grind, and Jonas Almeling, that was the former lead in Stockholm, was actually our like first like kind of community partner we worked with, because we needed to work with, so our communities have always been very intrigued. But when the book came out, they were actually sold out within a few days. We printed very few copies. The way we got the financing to do it was we actually sold the rights of the photos to people back. So that was kind of a way of bootstrapping a project no one believed in. And after the first books came out, we kind of had this massive inbounds of people from around the world that wanted to do a startup guide for their city. So a little bit like how Startup Grind have been built up, you know, like local community players, entrepreneurs, founders, investors. I said, hey, you know, we need this book for Sao Paulo. We need this book for Barcelona. How can we get that? And that was when we really stopped and we were like, okay, how are we going to set this up as a company? And I guess we're going to talk a lot about Startup Grind. So I'm not going to go so much deep into that, but like today we are like in 62 cities around the world. So we've done 62 different guides, probably more ecosystems, because some of our guides, they have various. So we also do country guides.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
on your website, it is 50. So the number has increased.
Yeah. So it's numbers. So we are like, right now we are doing, I think, 3 productions we have going on. Okay. And then for some of the ecosystems, for example, when we did Japan, we worked with 5 ecosystems, but it's like, okay, you would only see the Japan guide there. So It's depending how we counting them. Yeah.
But I think it's a very interesting. I know I've been coaching a lot of entrepreneurs at a co-working space before the pandemic, so we were very active there. Impact Hub. So Impact Hub had a few copies, and then there'll be some entrepreneurs dropping in for advisory process, and I'll just hand them over the book, and they'll, in fact, sit there and start sipping a coffee and not leave. They'll just start flipping the pages. Okay, how this is working. So I think it's a, and your point about having a touch and feel to something which you can actually sense some material behind the story and not something completely virtual. I think that's very interesting. Because people, because that's a way to engage a person to just take a moment off everything else that's going on and just sit there and go through the perspectives as you're saying. So very interesting point over there. And you also mentioned that for any idea, the timing has to be right. So Berlin, booming Berlin at that time after the slowdown. And I think we currently are in a similar situation. The world was hit by a couple of years of COVID, and then suddenly this slowdown in the VC space, economic slowdowns. But there are two angles out there. So there is always a pessimistic angle and there's always an optimistic angle. So I tend to look at the optimistic side. So I think even today, this time that we are in, it's a great time to build startups. I think that's what Antler believes in. I was recently interviewing Magnus, and he said that this is the best time to build startups. Anyway,
I believe that too.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, and I am one more point, because you started with music. That's something I love. I'm also a creator myself. So I think somewhere we need to do some sort of research of a correlation between being a musician or dabbling in music with entrepreneurship or venture creation. I think there'll be a high correlation.
That definitely would be something lab over for sure. I'm 100% certain.
True. Let's talk a little bit about, because you're quite active in the startup space. So tell me what are your other engagements in the startup space?
Yeah. So of course, mainly running Startup Guide, right, on a global scale. Then after I moved to Berlin, I moved to Lisbon, where we built up another office there as well. So I've been quite active in Portugal too, and then now 4 years ago, I moved back to Denmark, Copenhagen, and also I wanted to become more active into the Danish entrepreneurship ecosystem. And a lot of things is happening here, as you know. So I'm a board member of the new association working for tech startups in Denmark, which is like going really well. It's something that we figured out there was a huge need for after COVID, or actually during COVID, because there was a lot of help packages that was created, but none of them could actually fit into a tech startup journey, you know? So that was one thing that we saw, and we are doing a lot of work, both of course on the community side, but also trying to really change policies for tech entrepreneurs, ensuring that we will basically be able to help them more and more, and be competitive. I think that's also the thing, is like, you know, we see, unfortunately, that's not only in Denmark but in Europe in general, that, you know, too often we sell out our best tech startups outside of Europe. And I think it's a really, really important thing that we are able to create big tech companies here, because it's going to be the next big companies of tomorrow, right? So if you want to have a good welfare system as we have in the Nordics, it is very important to pay attention to these big companies and ensuring that they want to stay in Denmark and they want to stay in Europe, both because the technology is important, that we have it here. You know, I often ask people, what would have happened if Facebook and Google and Amazon would actually been created in Europe? How could the world be different? And secondly, because it is just jobs we are talking about. You know, it's like it's wealth. So, and how can we, you know, the Nordic model is to generate that wealth into creating a good society, and the good society needs to be able to create good companies. So I think that's a lot of the work that is our mindset when we wanted to start an association, was to really create better conditions for tech startups in Denmark. And now we're also talking with different associations in the Nordics to do the same.
I think that's a very interesting initiative. The more I talk to, so not the early stage startups, when we have scale ups on Startup Grind and other networks that I've managed, usually there are two sides. There are two sides of complaints that come in from the tech startup side. They think that the taxation rate is very high.
Yeah.
Of course, when you're a welfare-based economy, the tax rate on the startup and startups need to run lean. So that's one thing. So we need to figure that out, that how do we crack that code? And second is that one reason for startups to jump into, so Heja was here a few months ago, Fishbrain has been here, Volumental has been here on Startup Grind, if I just talk about Startup Grind. And most of these startups have found US to be a great market because it's a single homogeneous market with a single language. I think Europe being several languages, it makes expansion plan for a scale up. So I think those 2 points, when you have these meetings and strategy, if we can crack those codes, it'll make it much more easier for startups to kind of look at Europe. But great initiative.
So I'm on the board of that. I've been on the board of like the Danish Competitive Council, so looking also after COVID how after both doing it but also after COVID how Denmark can stay competitive the next 20 years, you know, again because so many things are shifting and you know, new technologies and new like other very, very big markets, China, US. How do we, and again, I don't want to talk Nordic, I more want to talk European level. How do we ensure that we are able to create, you know, big companies of the future here as well? And then I have a big heart for impact entrepreneurship and innovation, and also Startup Guide in 2019 actually moved our vision to and the vision to creating entrepreneurship for a better world. So we have a strong focus on that the startups that we feature and the companies that we feature need to have some kind of like create like a solution for a challenge that is really needed in the world, and not create a new Airbnb for dogs or something like that, something that already exists but you trigger it. And you know, I think there's so many challenges we need to overcome the next 10 years that I think if you should do something meaningful, it's like seeing how you could potentially solve some of these things. And I think it's our responsibilities as media companies and storytellers to highlight these people who is doing it, because it is a challenging road to go down that, you know. We can talk about impact investing. That's not what the talk is about today, but you know, how do you actually move from that there is not only one bottom line, but potentially several bottom lines that you should look at if our world and our planet and our society is also on it. So I'm also working, we have a conference called Impact the Future that is hosted in Sønderborg, in a city here in Denmark. But actually this year have just recently been announced that we're going to host it at COP27 in November in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, focusing on climate, because climate and energy right now is really intervening, and there's a lot of things to figuring out. There's a lot of new alternatives that needs to be accelerated in order for us to be able to create our own energy without Russia. So that's something we are focusing on as well. So yeah, I'm wearing a lot of hats, but I'm also, you know, I also have been running this company for almost 8 years. So in order for me not to get bored, I throw myself on a lot of stuff. And I think, you know, my question is all the time, how can we use this community that we have been building over so many years for something bigger than just publishing a book, right? And that's the challenge.
Well, I think the concept itself is very interesting, and the experience, like it connected in the zone when you were in Berlin, were a foreigner at that space, and then you wanted to connect. So I believe most of the startups that I talk to and then which become successful, it's always some personal pain or personal experience that results in something, because that way your ideal user is in fact yourself. So you are kind of creating a product for yourself. And if there are enough people out there with the same ideal customer profile, which is you, it will eventually work. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's a very interesting kind of a mirror thing. I'll just write it here. Need to write a blog on this. Okay.
Yeah, no, but I think, and that's of course also where sometimes you have to be very careful, right? Because that's why a lot of people, they fall in love with their own ideas, because they really need this, you know. But maybe there's not that many people needing that, and that's where you have to be able to kill your darling and pivot and make sure that you're not falling into the rabbit hole.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about, because you are in several startup ecosystems, and how would you see what makes a good startup ecosystem in your view, when you see it from the perspective you have been building your startup or company, which has helped build startup and entrepreneurs in more than 62 locations now?
So I think both Startup Grind, Startup Weekend have been looking into this as well, of course. And I think it was Brad Feld that some years ago he mentioned some key things. Brad Feld was one of the co-founders. Startup Weekend, I think he mentioned, like, you know, like you need to have, of course, talent, right? The infrastructure, you need to be able to move around, and you need to have the capital close to the talent, so the density between. So there's a lot of different things, but one thing that I think stands out when I have seen that, you know, what really works is definitely this. I call them the second generation of entrepreneurs giving back to the ecosystem. So what is the hardest thing is like to make the first big exits, right? To make the first big, you know, successful tech companies. How do you do that, right? When there is no role model close by. And I mean no role model also that investors locally haven't been able to see any companies coming from there and so on. So I think the really good ecosystems are the ones where there have been some really good companies that have already been built up. Potentially they have been gone to US, the Valley, right? Or other places, but then these entrepreneurs that have been through this very, very important learning journey as well are coming back and reinvesting into the ecosystem. And because they've had success, they suddenly have a way bigger respect. So more investors want to follow them again back. And I think this is a very like the life circle. That's the life circle of entrepreneurs, that where if people want to reinvest into the ecosystem where they were able to build up their companies, that's very powerful. Because it's these people who is going to basically be part of building the ecosystem, and they also going to be the role model for the next generation of entrepreneurs. But so it's not only role model, but it's also like freeing capital, potentially. And why I'm saying coming back, it's because you actually see a lot of people doing that. You're seeing a lot of people that have been out, have to sell the company or doing a big exit, and then they want to come back to where they are from and reinvesting into entrepreneurs. We see that a lot in Denmark, actually. Like I think to a certain extent, like we have some funds where it is exit founders that have come back and reinvested into the ecosystem. So that's one thing that I think people should really try to focus on, because you know, you can build up hundreds of programs and stuff like that, but if you don't have these cases of people that have actually gone through the journey and succeeded with it, and then I think also, that what is important is that an ecosystem doesn't compete with each other. You see that some places where it feels that the ecosystem is not big enough to happen, right? So it's not. I'm not talking about the startups themselves, but I'm talking about the different stake supporters in it. That they really ensure that, you know, while they exist is because they want to help entrepreneurs. So, and not compete, trying to, like, sometimes there's like so many different companies that doing the same thing to help entrepreneurs, and that could be used in so many other ways. And then I think, of course, also I think it again and again, I believe that there is a big need for the public to play a role, but it's a little bit like a Christmas party, right? It's like your boss, should pay for the Christmas party, but should necessarily not be there till the end of the Christmas party. And I think it's a little bit the same with public stakeholders in ecosystems. Sometimes they have this tendency to wanting to build everything themselves, but that's not their role. They should support the organizations who actually are really good at building that. So they should support organizations like Startup Grind, and not try to build Startup Grind by themselves. And that's also where when we advise, which we also do, upcoming ecosystems, we tell them that find these key people who have a passion for this and support them, because they are going to go in for the long run on this. So there's different elements, but I can highly recommend Brad Feld wrote about I think it's like five key things for building a great ecosystem.
Okay, but I think these are great points. If we just go rewind a little bit to a few minutes back when you started mentioning about second generation founders and entrepreneurs, I think that's very crucial. And the major trend that I see or we see is the VC world transforming. Like Founder Institute, for example, they have launched a global VC accelerator, and they are not doing their 9th batch now. There is so much venture. So there's a huge trend of solo VCs coming in. These are usually people who have worked well as a firm on 1 or 2 ventures, or they are high up in the professional ladder. So they might have, for example, a huge sales access to one particular vertical, and then they can go and create a venture fund around that vertical. So I think you're absolutely right when you talk about the second generation entrepreneurs, and then they become enablers of ecosystems, connections, and capital. But your second point was also very interesting, which was like ecosystems need to collaborate, and it's linked to your third point, which is like public organizations need to be in support role and not in create role. Because I think I was recently in managing one of the tracks at the Impact Hackathons in the Stockholm Impact Week. So so it just started as a simple point over there, but it became a huge debate. Like, because Stockholm had a slogan at that conference which said that the capital, the impact capital of the world, or something like that. And then same thinking, and there were many ecosystem players which said that if you say impact capital, then you become competitive. So you need to rephrase this entire sloganeering and make it more collaborative, so that it's not that we are in a race of becoming one city better than impact than another one on impact. And because if you enter that race, then the entire purpose of collaboration goes out of the window. So I would say, yeah.
But who came up with that saying? Was that
no, but it's
or
somewhere.
was it?
No, it's still there. It's still in the air. It's still bubbling in 2 or 3 different spaces right now. But I think your point is absolutely right, that the public sector is there to support and enable and not own. Because when you own, you cannot do it. That's not, you are there to serve. And so I think it doesn't align with the core philosophy. But great points over there, Sissel. Let's jump into another aspect, because what you are building is resting on a community on one side, because you're building a movement which is kind of community based. It expands into a particular city or location, then people say, oh, we are interested, and so a natural community formation starts happening, and then some people want to contribute. So there's one community side of what you're building. The other side is that it also goes into the creator economy, or content creation. So what do you see are the, let's see, what do you see on horizon for communities when we talk about startups space? Do you think communities in their current structure are going to be there, or are there new ways of people to connect coming in our way? Something on that.
Well, I definitely think that you guys are a trailblazer when it comes to this. So I would rather ask you the question of like, I just saw that you came out with your new accelerator, open source accelerator as well, and I think there's a lot of things in that space that is super interesting to see what's going on. What I can see from what I think there is a need for is still like the connection between the different ecosystems.
Okay.
So, what you mentioned before that, US is easy because it's like one single market, one single language, right? So how could we be better at actually connecting the ecosystems to each other? So it is easy for a startup to start in Stockholm, and very, very fast get into many different other markets, or at least test things in other markets. And I think we as community builders have a huge role to do there, right? Of like how to connect the different ecosystems together, because there is a lot of learnings to take, of course, but in the end of the day, it's still very similar, and I think that if we could be better at connecting these, then we also maybe are not coming out in this where it's becoming so much a competitiveness, but more of like, we need, I often try to play in my head like, what if there is no borders, right?
No.
Which I think actually the world would be way better if there would be no borders.
Exactly.
But that's very like philosophical, political road. So I'm not going to take that. But I think in the end of the day, startups are creating solutions for a global scale most of the time, right? And especially for the biggest challenges that we need to see right now, especially when it comes to energy, when it comes to food, when it comes to renewables and all of these things. We need to be able to scale them faster, implement them faster. And I know that there's people sitting right now in India working on an idea that also being worked on in Stockholm, or in Sweden. So it's like, how can we connect these people easier? So I think that would be nice if communities could go that way better than. And I think that's a role of us, and it's a role of startup going to do. But it could also be the role of investors and a role of cities in a way, right? Because they are also interested in both getting people to their cities, but also scaling ideas from their city to other places.
I think that's a great point. I think it can also go back to that. As human beings, we only have a capacity to digest till a particular level. When an organization or a community grows very big, it starts becoming a number and starts. So I think that's the challenge when you become big as a community, that how can you remain connected at a personal level? And that's where I think the DAO model, the new organizational models are going to be coming in and taking role from, because right now if we see communities of first generation startup communities, they're very vertically driven. So started as a chapter and another chapter added another chapter, and then the communities try to mix that role with some sort of role integration at regional levels. But then the problem becomes that how do regions speak to each other? And then so I think that maybe there is a new model that's needed that we can crack together. Let's grind and start a guide and figure out like what
be
will
wonderful. Would be really, really cool, because I know that startups often come to us and say like, can you help us scale? Can you let us know which city or country would be best to go next? Because this is very hard, and this is also where a startup could potentially like die from going and scaling to the wrong place too fast, right? And also, if you see but also understanding like the local ecosystem, understanding the local people that can help you there. And I think sometimes when you see these massive scales of especially delivery companies, I'm not going to mention any names, but it basically seems like they just have this one playbook, like this is how we're going to do it, in every city is going to work like this. Da, 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 da.
Yes.
And that's just not how it works, you know. And there's like local players that already are doing something. And so I think here that like the connection of like connecting to the right people, also to find the right people potentially joining the journey, which is also one of the key factors. If you can succeed in a new market, can you find local people who can really build this up for you? So I think there is a lot of things to look into, like when you look into like company scaling, and I think that's also where you have seen that it have actually gone wrong, right? Especially potentially in the healthcare sector, which is very important that things scales. But you come in and there's totally different, you know, structures and so on. Again, I'm not going to mention any names, but there is like big companies that have been very successful in Nordics and then coming into a DACH market and then just being totally like
yeah.
So
I think you mentioned something very interesting. One of the issues with founders as well is that whenever you're creating something, you try to take signals from your near market, the market that you are in. So if you're in Stockholm, you'll probably start thinking that you'll start launching a product here in Stockholm. But your idea can, within Stockholm, you can launch something which works equally well somewhere else or even better. So I think that level, if that level of leverage can be given to founders, that you can take your idea anywhere and be connected equally well there, given some wings, that's going to be interesting. So we can brainstorm on that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, but really good points and very interesting. Let me just see if we have some points coming up over here. So if you have any questions, you guys can write on the chat. Lonely Planet for Entrepreneurs, so inspiring. Agreed, more bridge moments are needed. I'm doing a quick review of the chat. Stockholm. So Asa, hi, thank you for your comments. Ray saying hit the nail on the head, that part about cross borders. I think that's very relevant and entrepreneurs can feel it. I think you're very right and very real there. Thank you. Georgie is here. We don't seem to have a lot of questions. A lot of finding partners at the regional level has been one of our biggest challenge. Okay, great. Then I would say we can, what kind of advice would you give to startup founders who are trying to work on, so I meet a lot of startup founders who are trying to build new community models, new connection models, creating something in content space. If you're building a startup, you have a journey of 8 years, which started with that cafe. I've just written it here, where you built something which didn't eventually go and fit into their integration. What would be your 1 or 2 pieces of advice to entrepreneurs out there building new things?
Building new things in general, I think what Magnus also said, like, I think there is no better time to build a company than right now. I think there's no better companies there's no better, how to say, like, place in the world to build your company than in the Nordics. I think we should really, really not take for granted this welfare system that keeps us afloat if things should fail. And you will probably fail. And hopefully you will be successful. So I think what I often say is, like, you know, build your company and because you have security for if something should happen, you would be able to get your feet on the ground again. And then, you know, it's hard to because there's, I don't know what the age of people, but I always encourage people to build their first companies as early as they can, because it is a time where you can experiment a lot, and I think it's like, that's also why I strongly support all kinds of, I was actually just in Stockholm where I visited KTH, right? Yeah. And there are university programs out there, and seeing the numbers and seeing how they work, and actually also seeing, which was super cool, how many female founders there actually have been through their programs on a entrepreneurship university level. And I think that is very different from when you go out later on you see where it's mainly men that are dominating. So I think really get entrepreneurship in as early as you can, high school, university level, even from kindergarten and up. I think make people learn how to build things from scratch. And as an advice for entrepreneurs, like there's so many, and sometimes it's so cliche, but it is really like about the Nike thing, just do it. It sounds so easy, but it is really about like you will just learn so much, and everything you would be thinking that this is gonna work out like this, it's not, and if you know that already, it can be comfortable in like, I have this idea right now, it's probably not gonna look like this in 1 year, but I can only figure out if I try,
Okay.
So sorry
Brilliant.
for the cliche.
No. This is absolutely. I was just writing the.
Yeah,
build.
I said Scott. I said
no.
sorry, Scott.
Yeah.
I just
I'll
quoted
take a couple of questions. I'll take. We have 3 questions coming up, but your message is very clear. Build early, build now, build in Nordics, and build and learn. So I think 5 build messages are there. And
exactly.
Scott, let's take your question. Over the past 2 years, I have sat in meetings in 50 plus cities, 30 plus countries, exhausting. Any advice on streamlining the process?
I need to understand just a little bit what kind of process of sitting in meetings, or I said in streamlining the process. I don't know exactly how to answer it. Maybe Scott, could you just write a bit more?
Scott, if you could elaborate, we move to the next one. Would you give different advice to small business owners and startup founders, Mikael?
Yeah, so I think for sure, like there is a difference between if you want to build more of a lifestyle business that, that should be able to kind of sustain yourself and your family and grow slowly. But in the end of the day, my key message will still be the same. You still have to do it. You still have to start. You still have to try. I think for what my advice there would be to say, like, be clear and honest about what kind of business that you want to build, right? That, to a certain extent, we have scaled startup guides to many different countries and cities, but we are still a fairly small business. It's still a small business, but we have just done it differently, and we have also decided to not be a tech company. Like, even though we of course want to go digital and so on, we don't have to have that, and I think a lot of people, they believe they always have to have the rocket or the hockey stick, and you don't. And I guess there is different advice when you are in that phase. You need different advice, and I'm giving the very early stage advice right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talat has a question. As a non-European founder trying to build a startup in Finland, I would like to hear what are your views on non-citizen founders being treated in Nordics? That's a very interesting question. I'll also jump into that. Come from, I'm not from Nordics, came here 8 years ago. I think my first view from my first-hand experience will be that it's very tough in the beginning, but you need to persist. So it is tough. So you cannot lose the battle. It's like a battle going up and adjusting in a new ecosystem. For Sissel, it was that when you landed in Germany, it eventually created this startup for you. So whenever you are in a different field, you need to adjust. But of course, my first view is that Nordics are very, how would you say, equal, but you still need to come up to a certain level to be that. So I think that's the initial struggle, which if you're in a new ecosystem, which would be the same case if somebody from Nordic goes and builds a new startup in Silicon Valley. Sure. They would still need to know the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Yeah.
And I think in general, I think we should treat people that come here with ideas and want to build things better. And that's meant from that's from a political level. I know there's been a lot of cases where people actually are being thrown out of the countries because they don't have the visas and requirements. And I think that is something, again, that's also a lot of the work that we are trying to do in the association, because that there is just so much talent that wants to work for Nordic startups, and we need to make sure that they actually have the access to get in. And that's also maybe a way that, or actually some of the companies that I have seen that have actually succeeded, they often have a foreign co-founder as well. And the foreign co-founder have often already worked in a startup before. So you actually have a lot of, again, that life cycle of, coming here for a job, jumping out, and then potentially start your own business. So I again, proceed with, like, insist on that you want to be part of that as well.
Asa has a question. What was the reason or the trigger for you to start your business back then?
So it was, again, this what we talked about, that I felt the need for a product like this. I was like, I would have wished for a startup guide when I moved to Berlin, and it was not existing. So it was that, and then it was also like helping people that doesn't know how to get into this. Back then it was also very like hard to get into a startup ecosystem. There was not all of these things that there is now. So I wanted to make sure that at least the things that were there were accessible for people to join in on. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. There are messaging pouring in at the very end. Let me see if we can. Now I was to arrange a video regarding that. Kindly, the Holoma project. Hi, Georgie. Yes. Yeah, I'll reach out to you. I'll take your email address here and we'll arrange a meeting. I think we are through the main questions over here. Can you find one, Sissel?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that I answered the Scott question. Tend to build with what we know.
Yes, Scott, you would like to come? I could bring you on stage if you want to. Maybe we have a minute or so. I'll just copy this, the Holoma project. So Georgie, I'll reach out to you after this call. Let's see, the easiest way is to book a meeting with me. Let me see if I can send you an email for that, so that can be simplified. I think we are more or less, okay, you can reach out privately. Okay, great.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Sissel, great if you could put in some contact information, maybe LinkedIn is a good one.
Yes,
that'd be great.
I'll also just put my email, so we have it here, and my LinkedIn as well. Awesome.
I'd like to offer a big thanks to everyone who was here today. Thank you, Scott, Stefan, Timu, Mikhail, and Mark, and everyone else. Osa is here. I'm just not reading the list right now. Yeah. But thank you everyone for being here and for making this a very interactive and interesting discussion. And thank you, Sissel, for
thank you
joining
so
us.
much. Thank you for the invitation. And yeah, let's keep talking about our ideas about creating more connected communities around the world.